Welcome to the show known as Conversations in Monrovia. I'm your host, Ralph Walker. Have you had the conversation? Where have you been all this time? You mean you haven't had the conversation? Maybe you're unaware about recent events that's been taking place. No, I'm not talking about Donald Trump and that fiasco, nor the Hillary sideshow. I'm talking about real life situations that's been taking place. Cops being killed, angry protests, and a call from the President of the United States that says we need to engage in a conversation on that 500-pound elephant that's in the room known as racism. Oh, you thought we was past that? Well, enough of me talking right now. I'm honored to have here in the studio Assistant Professor Christopher West from Pasadena City College. How you doing today, sir?
I'm great. How are you?
All right. I hope that roll-in didn't make you bored, but I tried, okay?
You engaged the audience. That's what matters.
Okay. Now, as Assistant Professor at Pasadena City College, and you majored in history?
Undergrad in history at Berkeley, Ph.D., USC. I'm the first and only African-American man to get a Ph.D. In history from the University of Southern California.
How did that happen? What was the obstacles, and why are you like the lone survivor out of such a prestigious institution that always talks about its great academic excellence? Why?
There's a sister, Christy Woods, who we were both going through the graduate program, and she was 5 years ahead of me. And we had very different experiences, despite the fact we both looked at the same area, Los Angeles, post-World War II. And the first time I lectured was in a class that she was teaching at Whittier. She's now chair of history at Riverside Community College. But she's the first black to finish a PhD in history from USC. In 2002, my mentor, George Sanchez, they were doing an Irvine study, and they were trying to figure out, so what has USC done for students of color at the graduate level? When he came to me, he said, "You're it." I'm like, "Yeah, George, I know I'm it." He goes, "No, you're really it.
You're the one."
You're like, if you finish, because it's 5 years away from finishing, you'll be the first.
Did you believe that?
So my thing was I would go, so SC has the doctoral robes, the cool red doctoral robes. Everybody has their quirk. Okay. My quirk was I would go roll by the bookstore when I was feeling like I can't do it, and I would just go like, I would look so sweet in those doctoral robes.
Oh, okay, I'm made for that.
And that was my shtick. That was my,
That's how you hung in there.
And I wrote, it's the same thing I tell my students. You have to have a 5-year plan. You have to know exactly where you're going. And so I took the risk of writing PhD after my name, and then every decision, every relationship, behaviors were connected into, am I going to be able to finish? And if it's not helping me to achieve that, then I need to evaluate it differently. That's how you finish.
So what was your driving force? I mean, pretty sure you had a lot of obstacles in the way. You didn't wake up every day still saying, oh, that PhD, I'm going to be there.
My grandmother, Annalie Cooney from the Delta, went to Tuskegee and spent, which I didn't realize, done 2 years at Tuskegee. My grandfather, her husband, worked in the mines, and his goal was to make sure that his family was taken care of, and they had 13. My mother's gonna kill me if I don't get that number right.
What's your mother's name?
Kathleen.
Okay, Kathleen.
I don't know what helped me to persist. I know that what helped me at Berkeley and what helped me at USC was a network of black women in positions around the campus who I could go to and check in. A
support group, yeah.
That was it.
All right, what was before college, high school? Grammar school. What was that like before you got to there? Because you sort of just spring forward like you just showed up. And
you don't just show up. You know that.
Okay.
My parents migrated from St. Louis in 64. Yeah, 64. My dad's out of the service at that point. My brother was born here in '65. I was born here in '66. And we desegregated a neighborhood on the west side. One black family moved in, and within 9 to 12 months, the entire neighborhood had transitioned from multiracial to African American residential, family owned.
Now, how was the school system?
The
Did it change that radical?
We had lived in South LA, right at Crenshaw and Washington. There's St. Paul's, which is a parochial school that was there, and my mother wanted to make sure that we stayed in the church. That's the thing that I think helped nurture and got her through. So we stayed at that school. And then in my 8th grade year, I applied for Loyola High School, Catholic Jesuit College Prep.
Yes.
We couldn't afford it, but I went anyway because I tested into it.
Okay.
Loyola was horrific.
In what way? Just the environment?
Bell Hooks talks about love, and the irony is I ran into one of the teachers who I had, he was Mr. O'Neill at that point, his father O'Neill, about 2 years ago.
A Jesuit priest?
Jesuit priest. And it was extraordinarily powerfully emotional because I was with my son, who's now at Loyola's.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw him, and I didn't even recognize him. He recognized me, and I just walked over and hugged him. And he said, "You were extraordinarily brilliant, and we didn't know what to do," which meant that we didn't love you. We knew you were in pain. We knew it wasn't working, but we didn't know, what do we do now?
What wasn't working? To some of the viewers, can you dwell and scratch a little deeper? It wasn't working, the fact that you was there as a black student, and was it a predominantly white environment?
It's the transitioning to the topic of the day. It is that who I am and the narrative of who I am doesn't get included. So my level is always history. So either did literature or history, I'm engaged. So you've got me. I'm automatically in the room with you. I'm present.
Mm-hmm.
But then you're giving me literature that has no information about who I am, and I can't figure out. And I know it's off, but I can't figure out why it's off. But you're not giving me the skills to be able to negotiate and figure out what's there, nor are you giving me characters or a narrative or story that includes me in that complexity. It's an elite institution. I rode the bus all 4 years. I worked there to have to pay for it. Mm-hmm. So all these ways that, your buddy went to spring break. He took the family jet to Italy. That's what the dude did, right? What'd you do? Yeah. Worked at McDonald's. And that's not a disservice or diminishing my parents' love, attention, and energy. Right. It just meant from a financial resource point of view, I'm in a situation where
the socioeconomical standards.
I'm very clear about economic resource.
Okay. Well, those attending that school had it.
But it's different. Well, see, if you centralize the African American experience, then it's not a social deficit model, meaning that, give an example. In 1860, there's 3,950,343 enslaved persons within the United States, according to the U.S. Census. If we value the average for those slaves at 850, and you multiply, you end up with about $3.4 billion. That's the largest source of wealth within the United States in 1860. Now, if you had an economic problem, you would have to liquidate your assets, and that asset could be your kid. African Americans have 16.7% European blood. And because of the Genome Project, we actually can track exactly where that European blood entered into the stream, and that's going to be between years 1810 and 1860. We also know from the chromosome exactly who was the father and who was the mother. More likely than not, it was a European man with a slave woman, which means that between the years 1810 and 1860, the majority of the way in which African Americans in the contemporary moment got European blood was the rape of white men of slave women. We know that.
Okay.
Now,
Wait a minute,
hold on,
Professor
hold
Weston,
on.
because the
Let's-
audience, you might have lost him a little bit now. We were
what
talking
happened to
about.
my class?
Okay.
They're
Okay.
like, where did he go?
You jet stream. That's what you just did. You jet streamed on
I
the
know.
audience. You at Loyola
Loyola High School.
High School.
Yes, sir.
In the high school.
Yes, sir.
Was a mental challenge to deal with what they were presenting to you. Someone that loves history and knew your place or your
didn't.
role. You did know it.
I didn't.
But you were searching for it?
I was hungry for give me
Okay.
something to sustain me, to feed me, to nurture me.
But you ain't getting it there.
But I'm getting dropped off
Okay.
every day between
Right.
8 and 3.
Right.
And I just wasn't interested. I'm like, I'm not disrespectful,
Okay.
but from a content point of view, there was nothing you're telling me that's jazzing me.
So what were your grades beginning to tumble?
My
Or
grades, I graduated from Loyola High School with a 2.43. On the old SAT system, I had an 890, which put me in the 26th percentile of everybody who took the SAT in the spring of 1983.
So you struggled there. You made it out of there.
Survived.
You survived.
Yes, sir.
So then from high school you went on to,
I was the lowest GPA and lowest SAT admitted to Berkeley in the fall of 1984.
okay, in the fall of 84. What was the climate of the times in 1984?
You're talking about the end of the first term of Ronald Reagan,
Oh, okay.
Star Wars,
Okay.
a campus climate in which apartheid struggles were present.
Yes.
And
tackled.
Yeah. And a level of student activism that makes Berkeley Berkeley.
Oh, okay. If you're a viewer that just tuned in, the name of the show is Conversations in Monrovia. I'm your host, Ralph Walker. Honored to have here in the studio Professor West from Pasadena City College, and we're going to be talking about that conversation. What is that conversation? Racism. Black, white, brown, and other. All right, let's go back in there. All right, from Berkeley and that backdrop, what was it like on college life? Did you go home? Were you on the dorm? What was it like? Berkeley. People have different opinions of Berkeley. Now, I was pretty conservative. What was it like then?
It was extraordinary. I call it my birthplace. And I surrounded myself with two men, Russell Rice and Kamshad Ajde. Kamshad's family was from Iran. His dad served in the military, and after the Shah of Iran, he migrated with his family to a relatively large expatriate Persian community outside of Modesto. Russell Rice's family, his dad was World Bank, I believe, and so he was born overseas. They both were extraordinarily
Now, when you say Persian, you mean Iran?
Iran.
Okay.
And so interacting with people who are operating at a very high level with very high expectations kept me focused on that which is possible as opposed to that which I could not.
Oh, okay.
And so the sort of that networking cohort of people who are engaged was critically important. I got involved in student affairs in college ed, and so I did.
What was your biggest thing out of student ed that you reflect back on?
So I worked as a resident advisor, which is the people who work inside of the residence hall. At Berkeley at that point, there was 123 or 124. I was the only African American male, and so they started doing this diversity junk. And so I sat up in the room and I was like, I want to talk about the fact, well, why there ain't no black men in this room but me? And I sat back down. I guess I had dropped a nuclear bomb because the place went glowing, which I didn't think. I'm just simply stating the obvious.
Right.
What I learned at that point is that I have the gift of shifting institutions. And what I mean by that is when I left my undergraduate career in Berkeley, three things had changed. One, we had 35 African American staff at a variety of different levels. We had helped to recruit and hire a guy by the name of Denzel Sweet, who's now the VP for Student Services at the University of Washington. We institutionalized a diversity training session that they used for 10 years called Worldview, which incorporates diversity in a substantive way. And there was a recognition that there was a student voice that was necessary that simply hadn't been there before. I did the same thing when I was working as a resident director at Cal State Northridge in terms of hiring staff, and I did the same thing at USC. We established Somerville, which is the African American theme floor, which is in its 20th year now, which didn't exist before I got there. And it's not me, Chris, ego. That is that you have to shift institutions to make substantive difference. It's not about your life experience. It's around creating an environment thereby folk are offered the opportunity to pursue their own greatness.
All right, so why is there been such a resistance to that?
Wow.
I mean, the benefits were good. I mean, as far as diversity, people learning that you're not my enemy. You're probably, you may even be smarter than me.
Yeah.
But you can make the world situation better. You can make a surgeon doing surgery even better. You may even be a greater professor, but I can learn from you the pushback.
Depending upon the context,
Well, those that say we don't need that program anymore.
oh, the we are all humans. That if I took your DNA or I took
Right.
a studio DNA, if you looked up on the mic, there would be incremental, infinitesimal variation in our human genome. The variations are extraordinarily small. But
we hear that,
yeah,
we read that, but there's a whole lot of folks that don't accept that.
well, so part of it, I think, part of it is I jet stream. So let me slow back to go back.
Okay.
The reason that the financial piece is critically important is because those slaves were doing 16 million pounds a year by 1860. Cotton is selling in 1860 in the world market at 10 cents a pound, which means that annually the labor of those Africans is producing $1.6 million on an annual basis. That's 1860, 1.6 million. That's the largest source of exports in the United States. In fact, if you take everything that the United States produced in 1860 and put it into a bucket, it doesn't equal cotton. We run numbers in my class, and so I have them extrapolate if a slave is going to produce 200 pounds of cotton a day, which is on average, and they do that 6 days a week, and you've got 25 slaves. We projected out that by the time 10 years later, you're going to be a millionaire just by gross revenue, but it's 920 and some change.
What an inheritance.
Just for 25.
What an inheritance if a child is going to benefit from this.
And what a horrific situation if you are black and enslaved, your father is the slave master, and the first person who gets sold is you because you're too much of a reminder of what happened.
Well, some people out there watching and say, well, that was a long time ago. You're talking about cotton. How relevant is that today?
I completely agree. So let me give you a story. So this morning, when we're filming this, it's going to be Wednesday, July 20th, and we have a new executive director of HR at the college, Dr. Lisa Norman.
At Pasadena
City College. And I'm sharing this because I asked her permission to share it. So we're sitting down at 10:30 and we're talking about one of my roles as diversity coordinator for the campus, and we're chatting, and she has 5 boys. They have a late model BMW. It's Father's Day. It's the end of the day. Her older sons are in one car, her husband's driving, she's in the passenger seat. Her 15-year-old Chris is in the right passenger seat. They hit 2 stop signs, and all of a sudden they get lit up by the police department. That's very strange. Pull them over. Police department says, do you know I pulled you over, talking to her husband? And he's like, no, why'd you pull me over? You were doing 62 miles an hour. We just came out of the restaurant. We hit 2 stop signs. We didn't even accelerate to 20.
62 is pretty
We're not
fast.
done. We're not done. And the other reason I stopped you is because your lights weren't on. He said, sir, I have a BMW late model. If those lights don't go on, I turn on that engine, I'm going to take it back to, well, let me see your registration. So give him the registration. Give him the driver's license. Now, the whole time, the second officer is standing right next to the passenger side door where her 15-year-old son is, with his hand on his weapon. And she's got to calmly talk to her son. This is what we've talked about. I need you to be calm. The officer comes back to the driver's side and says, well, I'm going to let you go this time on the 62 miles an hour, but I'm going to give you a ticket for not having your headlights on. And he writes, headlights not on in inclement weather. Now, if you remember Father's Day for this particular year in 2016 in Southern California, there wasn't a cloud in the sky.
Beautiful day.
It was a Groundhog's Day.
Yeah.
But it was inclement according to that officer. And when I left meeting with her, she had to allocate her time to contest a ticket that was about race.
So I take it the officer was white? Or what? Am I prejudging too fast?
I never asked her. Because I don't think it is a matter of the race of the officer anymore. It's about the system that's in place that demonizes the black body. Now, whether some of us who are of color take on the role of the officer, you erase color and you become blue.
You think you become blue?
Well, I'm not, again.
Well, the reason why I say that, because one of the officers that were slain in Baton Rouge
was black.
Was black. But he also said when he's in uniform, he catches a lot of heat.
Of course.
But when he's out of uniform,
he catches heat too.
They fear him.
Or he catches heat. Yeah.
So no matter what you're wearing, if you're of my pigmentation, you can catch heat.
I think
I'm saying that you can be a part of a systematic organization that nesters and has racism.
Yeah.
So it's still going to be there, even if you dress like with them and you march with them and you eat with them and you go to the range and you shoot with them.
Yes.
It's still there.
And we don't want to talk about that. That's the elephant.
That's the elephant.
We don't talk about that.
All right. I can hear those viewers out there. Well, let's start talking about it. Let's talk about racism. Is racism still prevailing in America just as long as it's been prevailing as folks picking cotton?
I think so part of the narrative I think that's difficult is, well, wait a minute, slow down. You just had 2 terms of a man of the African diaspora in the presidency. What are you talking about? Mm-hmm. You just had somebody of the African diaspora was the Attorney General for literally the last 8 years. What are you talking about? So that doesn't make any sense if these 2 figures are basically have control over all nuclear weapons for the United States and run the justice system. So that seems to be an unreasonable proposition.
What's your reflection on 8 years of Obama? I've heard many different opinions from black folks in particular. Some love him, some say I voted for him, but he didn't do a damn thing, not understanding the political nature of the office. But what's your take?
I just worked for 10 years on a documentary film on Tom Bradley, who gets elected in 1973 and serves 5 terms. And one of the critiques of Mayor Bradley was that he didn't do enough for the African American community. But I think that Bradley's experience mirrors Obama's experience, which is you're operating in a multicultural plurality in which you need to have a multiracial coalition to achieve elective office. Right. When Bradley's elected, blacks are no more than 13 to 15% of the electoral population. When Obama's elected, again, no more than 12 to 15% electoral population.
Do we expect more? Do we expect more?
I don't know if we need to expect more. I would say symbolically a couple of things. When he was first elected, I was the history curator at the California African American Museum, and we had a viewing party of his inauguration. I don't remember much about the speech. I don't really much about the ceremony because I was emotionally moved by the fact in my lifetime there were 2 black girls in the White House, and I can just remember seeing their hair. And they're in the White House, and they're the first family. I don't really care what he did for the next 8 years. as a black man within the United States. But here's what he did. So let's do what he didn't do. His daughters didn't get arrested. They weren't convicted of drugs. They didn't kill anybody. They didn't shoot nobody. They didn't do anything else with that.
And they didn't get pregnant.
Right? He is a Christian, church-going, no scandal. If I remember correctly, correct me if I'm wrong. His wife is gorgeous and beautiful, talented, smart, and interesting. His mother-in-law lives with him and helps to raise the children. Correct me if I missed any of this. But somehow that narrative has never been told.
Well, why is it that, can I jump out on a limb and say, why is it that some white folks can't accept that, even though quite a few of them voted for him, but it still was that deep-seated hate that this black man and his family and the First Lady is in the White House. And it is alleged that they collaborated, members of the Republican Party and probably a few Democrats also, said no matter what he does, we're going to fight against it.
It's not an allegation. We know for a fact that the leadership of the Republican legislative met the night of the inauguration and said that we are going to actively work to make sure that he's a first-term president. Their words, not mine. Their words, not mine. We know for a fact that they actually actively contested any initiative that he said. Their words, not mine. So we don't have to do revisionist history. We don't have to come up with data points. We don't have to look for data points. That is what happened. Actively, democracy doesn't work, and American democracy in particular has to have what is a party system. We don't have to necessarily have a party system, but if the party system is to be effective, the party that is not in power has to agree that they're not going to at least be, it's sort of loyal opposition, loyal to the nation state and the ideas of the nation state, not loyal to the other political party. When a man of the African diaspora gets into the presidency, those rules went away.
So, well, did we fail him as a people by not going out and voting in the voting in off presidential election is when you elect the senators or the representatives? Did we let him down? Because the House and all that changed. It went back to the Republicans.
That's a typical narrative for, given how he gets elected, given moving into the second term. It's a process that simply has happened to many second-term presidents. It happened to Bush 2, 43. That's sort of a normal narrative. What's not normal is that at the end of his term, you are seeing people who look like him killed on the streets.
But I'm saying we as African American people, we did not seize that moment.
I heard your question.
And rally behind him.
I heard your question.
And engage in meaningful protest.
That's what Black Lives Matter is. It's meaningful protest. That's what Black Lives Matter is. It's meaningful protest.
All right, you took me there. To some of the viewers that may be just tuning in, what is Black Lives Matter? What is it? We hear the slogan, we hear the words, hashtag Black Lives Matter, that has sprung off everything else matters now, okay?
No, it don't.
So much for the Black Lives Matter. We got Blue Lives Matter. We got White Lives Matter. We got, you name it, and it matters. So why is Black Lives so relevant that it matters? Now, in I don't know how old the organization is.
It hasn't been around that long. So here's the reality. Martin Luther King Jr. was a young pastor with his wife, Coretta, that walks into Montgomery. He's the son of a very famous Baptist minister, and he's at the beginning of his career. In Montgomery, Alabama, there's 40,000 African Americans that live there. And African American women have been forming political councils since the late 1940s, vibrant and active. Rosa Parks had gone to the Highlander Freedom School in Tennessee as a training as resistance and civil disobedience. That's her narrative. But more importantly, Rosa Parks was protected because her financial wherewithal was not dependent upon white folks. And so when E.D. Nixon, when she gets arrested, and she had been the support secretary for E.D. Nixon for the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters and local NAACP, the request was made to her, can we use you as a test case? Because they had been looking for one in Montgomery in particular. Which means that 40,000 black folks get informed in the mid-1950s by this group of black women. I'm circling back because the origin of the Black Lives Matter movement is black women.
Right.
So somehow that didn't get told. But you should tell the connected story. Taking a stance against